So, following up on the conversation that we've been having recently regarding the growth of transatlantic and also sort of global trade in the wake of the discovery or the exploration of the quote unquote New World, North and South America, but also the expansion of the Indian Ocean trade and the introduction of Europeans into that venue in the later part of the 1400s and certainly by the 1500s. We're going to talk now about the transatlantic trade and the impact that that has globally, and sort of how the economics and the demands of and the demands for products from North and South America lead really very straightforward into a demand for enforced and unfree labor in the form of African slavery in the mid 1500s, starting predominantly in South America and the Caribbean, but then certainly expanding northward into North America, where by 1619 you have the first slaves being brought into colonial Virginia, and then ultimately spreading further afield from there into other parts of North America. We will also look at the impact that this has on the continent of Africa, particularly the west coast of sub-Saharan Africa, and how the introduction of slavery in North and South America directly impact the people within Africa, again, within particularly Western Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, it's important for us to be aware here that the conversation about slavery is one that can become very contentious. And what I'm going to report today and what I'm going to discuss today is really just sort of very much factual about sort of how the institution of slavery is introduced in North and South America, the impacts of it, and generally sort of how the demand for the products from the New World, quote unquote, North and South America, help inspire that goal. Now, when we talk about this, right, when we're all kids in our elementary school or in our junior high, right, one of the things that we are all taught about is the triangular trade. Now, that's basically what we're going to be talking about here today, right? It's we're talking about the triangular trade, or at least what was once called the triangular trade. But I refer to it by a different name. I refer to it by the Atlantic system, or the Atlantic slave trade. And I call it that because I think it's important for us to think of it not as a triangle, because it was not necessarily, triangle, I think, implies that people are going in a certain direction, and there's certainly a certain portion of directionality to it, and that's not exactly the case, right? Goods are going from Britain to North America, and North America to Africa, Africa to Europe, but then they're all going in different directions as well. So it's important for us to be aware of that, and I have a graphic that will show that. So if you remember back to when we were initially discussing the rise of Spanish control of the New World of South America in particular, right? There was a demand for products coming out of South America, right? Sugar, silver from Potosi, and other high demand products, tobacco and other things. And by the time we get to the mid 1500s, as a result of something that is called the Great Dying, one of the impacts that we see is a massive amount of Native American death, but the demand for the products from South America and North America does not diminish. If indeed it may actually increase, right? So as a result of that, what you see occurring here is a growth in a need for more output, and in particular, right, with a decrease in Native Americans, there is a demand for enslaved people to produce those goods, right? And those goods, right? Those goods such as sugar, potatoes, corn, become very, very important. Those North American or South American goods become very important to the economies and to the livelihood of the people in Europe. So initially, the predominant commodity that is being produced is sugar. Now, sugar is originally indigenous to Europe or Afro-Eurasia and comes across the Atlantic Ocean with some of those first travelers into North and South America. However, right, it is in the Caribbean and in particular in Brazil where sugar production can happen on a massive scale. And one of the first major places in which production for sugar occurs is in the Caribbean and Brazil. And many of the slaves, and we're going to look at a graphic in a moment or two, where most of the slaves, and something to the tune of about 95% of slaves that wind up coming to the North or South America between 1550 and the later 1800s, over that 320 or 330 year period, arrive at the Caribbean and or Brazil. And it's because of the massive demand for sugar. You will remember, I hope, that one of the side effects of all of this travel and trade, this global travel and trade, is that there is a growing wealth within Europe. And as people have more wealth in their pocket, they're going to demand sugar, silks, porcelains, teas, coffee, spices, to show that, to enjoy those luxuries. I think like many people do once they have a little bit of disposable income, want to try and get those sort of luxury items. And that's the same 400 years ago. So the slave labor that is part of this goes for those items, right? And I'm not trying to justify the the institution of slavery because people want these luxury items. It's still abhorrent, but I'm just trying to put a rationale behind it and how that increased wealth and increased disposable income or comfortability leads to a rise in this demand. So sugar is an extremely difficult product to produce. So when sugar is grown, right, for those of you who don't know, sugar is grown in large stalks that we call canes. When sugar is produced, right, once sugar is ready to be harvested, it must be processed within about 36 to 48 hours. Otherwise, it will spoil and not be usable. So it'll be wasted, right? So sugar is cut down and the stalks must be then boiled so that the raw sugar within the cane can be pushed out. So sugar then, so they take the raw cane, they heat it up in large kettles, and then it must be pushed through rollers so that the sugar can be processed. Obviously, this is extremely dangerous because you're dealing with hot, molten molasses and sugar. You're dealing with hot stalks. You are dealing with very hot climate, right? You are in the Caribbean after all. So all of this is extremely dangerous. People's arms get trapped in the rollers, kettles blow up. It is a very difficult and very tough job for people. The average lifespan of a slave on a sugar plantation is roughly 23 years. So people are dying with exceptional speed, right? So it's important for us to remember that, and it's important for us to think about, right, how dangerous and how difficult these jobs must have been. And as I said, as a result of that, you have a huge amount of slaves coming across the Atlantic Ocean over a period of about 330 or so years. There are something to the tune of between 10 and 12 million people brought across the Atlantic Ocean from sub-Saharan Africa across through to the New World, the Caribbean, North America, and South America. Now, I do not want to overstate this, right? Why is sub-Saharan Africa chosen as a place from which slaves will go? It is because of sort of racist ideology, right? Yes, part of it is locale, right? Europeans can travel down the coast of Africa easily, pick up human cargo, and bring it across to North, South, and Central America. But it's important for us to also be aware, right? They could have gone anywhere for these slaves, but they intentionally chose sub-Saharan Africa because the people in sub-Saharan Africa are black and they look different from the white Europeans. It's important for us to also be aware, right, that obviously slaves from certain areas wind up going to other areas, right? So if you think about it in terms of this, right, the British, for instance, have the Gold Coast. Most of the slaves coming from the Gold Coast will wind up in British colonies. Slaves from Portuguese-controlled regions will mostly wind up in Brazil or Portuguese-controlled areas. And the same would be for French-controlled areas in Africa, taking people to French-controlled places in South America, Central America, right? So it's not as, so what I'm trying to say there is, slaves who wind up, let's say, in Brazil tended to come from a similar region within Africa. And the same would be true for slaves who wind up in British territories. They wind up coming from similar areas. And again, you can see that the areas where most of the disembarking of slaves occurs, right? Southern Brazil, coastal Brazil, I guess I should say, in the Caribbean, and then less so in North America. Where are they taken from? Again, largely Portuguese-controlled areas, British-controlled areas, and so on. Now, in terms of the arrival, right? So we call this portion of the travel, right, when they are in the ocean, right, when they are in the boats, we call that the Middle Passage. We call it that because slaves are obviously not coming directly from the coast. They are coming from interior Africa, right? Tribal fights occur in the interior of Africa, and people are brought across Africa to the coast. And once they arrive at the coast, they are then boarded onto ships into the Middle Passage, and then they arrive, right? So the first portion of that travel is from interior Africa to the coast. They wait on the coast, and then the Middle Passage is from one side of the Atlantic to the other, from Africa to North or South America or Central America, and then the final portion of that is the last passage is the arrival from the coast to wherever that person winds up. Now, within a slave ship, right, you're talking, depending on the size of the slave ship, there might be more or less people. There might be more or less people within it, right? So the size, but I guess I should say the people who are the slave traders, right? They want to maximize the number of people that they can get. So for about 23 and a half hours a day, slaves are kept in the in the hold of a boat. They are chained together and they are put in extremely tightly. So disease spreads rapidly. People die in exceptionally high numbers. It is a gruesome and a grueling journey across the Atlantic Ocean, and it could take anywhere from 50 to 100 days to do that journey. So you're talking particularly in the early portion, you're talking larger numbers of days as you get, by the 1800s. Understanding the slave trade and the speed of the slave trade is a bit better understood, so it might speed up a little bit. But you're talking huge numbers of slaves dying as trade is going on. In some cases, you're talking up to 30% of the slaves on a ship dying in the Middle Passage. And the bodies of those deceased are just tossed overboard. Again, there is no respect to the humanity or the dignity of the people. Okay, so when we talk about the slave trade, right? It's important to talk about the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of people who are traded annually across the Atlantic Ocean. And the impact in Africa is huge, right? As Europeans are demanding and desiring larger numbers of African slaves, what's occurring here is that there are people within Africa who take it upon themselves to negotiate and deal with Europeans, right? So you might ask yourself, why would they do that? In a lot of ways, it's self-preservation. If I am an African person who is living near a coast, if I can negotiate and deal with these Europeans, maybe I can save myself or save my family. So, the way I often describe this is like Tribe A and Tribe B, right? If Tribe A and Tribe B go to war with one another and Tribe A wins, the prisoners they take from Tribe B can be sold for guns and ammunition and other items. Europeans then can take those slaves, those prisoners, and turn them into slaves. And now Tribe A has guns, swords, and other materials that they can now take to Tribe C, defeat Tribe C, and start the process over. So it becomes a process whereby Europeans can exploit tribal rivalry, but also tribes, right, can use that rivalry to gain more resources to continue defeating others. So Europeans are skilled at using or manipulating the relationship between tribes to expand their own control. And again, this all goes back to demands for product. Right? For the Europeans, there is a huge demand for product, right? Sugar, molasses, rum, wood, rice, silk, indigo, tobacco, potatoes are in there as well, whale oil, lumber, furs, right? All going from North and South and Central America straight over to Europe. And then from Europe, right, it's manufactured goods, and you can see them coming straight over to North America, where in terms of what is Europe selling to Africa, as I said a moment ago, it's guns, it's iron, it's better materials, it's clothing, it's a lot of product that can help Africans defeat other members of their communities. You also see, right, the only product coming out of Africa going to the New World is slaves. Now, going up to Europe, right, you have some products, spices, woods, gold, ivory, again, luxury items, right? So it's the demand for these luxury items that is causing people to demand or to have the needs for slaves. Now, finally, the last sort of thing I want to talk about here is slave resistance, right? So slaves were not passive members of society, right? They did have agency. So slaves would often, you know, resist. They would rebel. There are many cases of slave rebellions. They would also slow down their work, have fake sicknesses or fake illnesses in order to prevent or not need working. They would slow down exceptionally to try and hurt their masters economically. They would break tools in order to prevent having to go to work. Slaves did have agency, and it's important for us to be aware of that. So when we look at the transatlantic slave trade and the impact that it has, right? It's important for us to be aware. It is the demand and the desire for the products from South America, North America, and the Caribbean that lead to these people from Africa being enslaved and transported across in a forced, unfree, unpaid manner to North and South America.